Just being so young and remember pulling those carrots out of the soil for the first time and having my mind exploded that that's something you could even do. My mom didn't realize it then, but she was sparking a lifelong interest in gardening and growing plants. She probably doesn't remember that day, but I do. It was really important to me as a child. So we're gonna just start off the bat with site selection, the very basics. Where are you going to choose your location? You really want it to be an easily accessible location. You don't want to stash it away so that you can forget about it or forget that it was even there. I can struggle with this. Last year, I made the mistake of, I do container gardening a lot, or I did. This year's the first year that I have land to actually do an in-ground garden, and I'm super stoked about it. So next year's vegetable garden should be a little more exciting with some real pictures. Um, But I made the mistake of putting my blueberry plants in they're in a pot, which is fine. But I made the mistake of putting them like at the end of my garden so that I couldn't see them every day when I walked in through my front door. And I didn't water them as much as I needed to throughout the whole summer, and my production was a little subpar on them. So you want to remember that it's there, you want it to kind of be in your face, and you want to be able to enjoy being there. You know, think about where you keep your dumpster. You know, you don't want to be hanging out around your dumpster or whatnot. Anyway, you want really well-drained soils for healthy growth. I know we don't get that around here in the Willamette Valley with our heavy clay soils, but there's a little bit of amending that you can do to our native soils to help that along. It's actually, our native clay soils are actually really great in that they're very rich in organic material. It's just, however, that clay has really tight binding properties that it will not let go of the water and it will not let go of those nutrients to the plants. So that amending helps break up that clay and allow the nutrients in the water to be accessible to the plants. Um, as you're picking your location, think about using pots, raised beds, fence lines, balconies. Really, we're just going to use whatever space you were given. Make do with what you got. Ideally, it'll be sheltered from strong winds and close to a source of irrigation. You don't want to be hauling water out to your raised beds in the middle of summer, multiple times a day potentially. The next important thing about picking a location and planning it out is that vegetables generally love to have that 6 to 8 hours of full sunlight to thrive. Excuse me. Um, some of our tomato or our vegetables love the baking heat more than others. Tomatoes are a good culprit of that. Your squash, your melons. So you can plan to put those crops in that more baking evening heat. Um, the evening sun here in the Willamette Valley carries a lot more weight than the morning sun in that it is a lot stronger and it'll burn plants a lot quicker than the light, easy morning sun. Some vegetables can benefit from that afternoon protection so that they don't burn their tips, and those will include things like lettuces, chards, kales, and herbs. So as you're looking at your space, just evaluate your sunlight availability through the different times of the day and the different seasons, because we all know spring and winter vary very dramatically around here. Or not spring and winter, but winter and summer. Consider trees on your property, buildings, or sunlight exposure. Sunlights or buildings will also shade your garden, but sometimes it can also create a baking area in that the sun can reflect off like your White House or something and just create a little bit more warm areas. So knowing your sun in your area will give your vegetables kind of a leg up in the growing season as you can strategically think about where you're going to put them. Layout and planning of the garden. This garden, the picture in this garden is absolutely beautiful. Um, don't make that your standard. Lower your expectations. It's gorgeous, but it's very sterile, clean, and that's okay too. But I'm a fan of natural and dirty in my own garden. So, I'll have a lot of empty dirt spaces and stuff, and I'll go over why in a little while. So as you're planning your layout for your garden, focus on both aesthetics and functionality for your garden success. So this little picture here has those aesthetics on point, but it also has that functionality because it's got that garden hose right there in the fence line. So it's super easy to deal with. The rocks on the ground prevent a little bit of extra weeding. It's beautiful. So an efficient layout maximizes your space that you have available for plants, and it as well as simplifies maintenance, uh, as i.e. weeding on your footpaths. Number one, assure that accessibility for easy watering and harvesting in your layout. Easy harvesting, I like to recommend using trellises for things. I don't know if you guys ever seen squashes and melons growing on a trellis, but you can grow them in kind of a tunnel and they'll hang down in the center of it. Absolutely beautiful.
Here's something in the chat about, are you sharing your screen?
Oh. Yeah, I am. Let me see what I can see here. Are you sharing? Oh, or am I sharing my slides like you want access to them afterwards? I can do that. I'll have my email address at the end of this. It's just my name, Angelee@shenards.com. But if you email me, I'll be sure to try to send you a copy of this, or at least a link to it on Prezi. I think that's what the question was. All right. So utilize raised beds, organize rows, pots, trellises to provide ample space for plant growth. Plan it on the way that you want it, what plants intrigue you. Really think about what you're going to eat, what your kids will eat, and maybe even what the pollinators will like. There's no point in growing it if it doesn't make you excited. We can only grow so much kale. Um, so also as you're planning, consider crop rotations. Camille, my coworker, just did an organic gardening class where she really went into crop rotation. So if you're interested in that, I would recommend going there. But the quick and dirty of it is that you just organized your vegetables based on the different taxonomic families because they share a lot of the same pests and diseases. So if you switch the different families in your beds, you keep the pests and diseases on their toes, and as well as the soil health. And it's just a really great thing to practice in there. She points out that everything everyone wants to grow is a Solanaceae, which is tomatoes and peppers and potatoes. And so it's basically just like organizing your Solanaceaes to give your soil a little bit of break in between them. Consider full-grown plant space. Those squash and zucchini foliage get huge, as well as their fruit. One plant can grow really long vines, maybe like 10 feet of vine. So, and tomato root masses will take all of the space that you can get. Like you'll give them. Tomatoes have very extensive root systems, which makes them very thirsty in pots, but not in the ground or raised beds because they're able to stretch their feet out a little bit more. So consider maturity rate of the plants you're planting, like how long will it take until harvest time, so you can plan your next steps after that, as well as are these annuals or perennials? Are they going to die back, or is it like an artichoke or a strawberry or a blueberry like that will come back and live year after year? You have to devote a little bit more space in the garden for those things that want to be there long term. All right, now we're going to get into the little more fun bits of this. Preparing your beds, getting ready for the vegetables. Veggies do not want to compete with others, other plants, other weeds, anything. They really want their space to their own. So you're going to have to think about killing the grasses and the weeds well before starting a new area. If you're like me, moving into a new home where it's just all grass that you're going to be converting into a garden, first thing is first is to get rid of that grass. And you can do this in multiple different ways, including thick mulching, like with yard fall leaf litter debris, um, cardboard. A lot of people like to put wet cardboard out into the garden and just let it sit there over the whole winter. These are kind of things that you have to be thinking about over the winter to get prepared for in spring. Chemical application, there's a few of those that are just real quick, ready to go. However, not a lot of us want to use those chemical applications on our vegetable beds that we're getting ready to eat in. Tilling is probably one of the more popular ones just because it's quick, easy, it can be done now, and it breaks up those grasses and kills everything in that area. As you're getting started, good soil is number one, regardless of how you grow, whether it be container pots, raised beds, or in the ground. Knowing your soil is going to get you really far when it comes to your vegetables. Container pots are incredibly thirsty. You're going to be planting, welcome in. You're going to be planting in like potting soil in like a plastic pot or whatever you got. And so they have closed bottoms, and those roots of those plants are unable to reach through the native soils to scavenger through nutrients or water. Let me just double check my chat here. I think I might have something. Is it important to do rotation in greenhouses? I would say it's always important to do rotation. Well, you might go years without seeing an issue. It's just a really good practice to just get into the just get down into the rotation. How do you know your soil? How do you get to amend it? Okay, so I'm talking about it. We'll talk about it a little bit more. I might wait on questions a little bit so I can kind of get through this. But feel free to pop them in the chat or write them down, and we'll maybe visit them at the end. So container pots, these are like my blueberries I was referring to that I just keep in a pot all year round. They are basically potted in a potting soil. You can mix them with like planting composts or Harvest Supreme to give them a little extra but they can't scavenge for that water, and they're in that really tight closed system. So you have to water very routinely when you're doing container pots, especially in that 100-degree weather. And you have to fertilize pretty routinely too, because they're going to be hungry, especially if you do things that are generally hungry plants like tomatoes or squashes, cucumbers, lettuces. Lettuces aren't as hungry as those things because they take a lot of energy to grow these melons. Um, raised beds are kind of before I go to raised beds, let's talk about native soils. So our native clay soils are really heavy in water. They hold on to that water very, very well. Um, and a lot of the times that creates oversaturation issues in the garden. So you can add things like the soil building conditioner. That Harvest Supreme is really great for drainage too into your native soils just to kind of help build them up. Add a little bit of organic material into those soils to help that clay break down and release the nutrients to the plants. Things in ground are going to be able to hold on to a lot more water, meaning you have to water less, and they're able to scavenger for more nutrients for our soil, which means fertilizing a little less. Raised beds, depending on what kind of raised bed you have, are in that little happy medium in between containering and natives. In that a lot of them are closed bottom, so like those tomatoes can just aggressively root through that nice raised bed soil, but also into the native soil below it. I recommend feeling your soil often, sticking your hands in it, just getting to know what kind of soil you have will get you a long ways. Like, is it sandy? If it's sandy and barky, it's not going to hold a lot of moisture. Is it really goopy and clayey, or is it nice and beautiful and black and just like light? And I like to tell people to smell it too, good soil has a good soil smell to it rather than smelling like a dirty sink full of dishes. Um, if your soil stinks, I think you have bigger problems. Anyway, vegetables love organic rich material and soil, and by that I mean decomposing matter. Um, it helps increase soil structures, nutrients, as well as water availability. And we use these soil amendments intentionally to kind of pivot our soils to our needs. Things like the composts and the soil building conditioner. Um, I have a little bit of weird formatting happening in here, but there's good information. So if you get motion sick, I apologize ahead of time. Um, but now we're going to get into timing. When to start your vegetables. So spring and summer crops are like early summer crops, not that heat loving. They tend to be frost tolerant in that we're in this little weird little time here where we might get a frost between now and the next month, especially here in the Willamette Valley. Summer, fall crops are heat loving and they tend to harvest closer towards the fall. Fall and winter crops are very frost tolerant and overwintering into spring harvest. So here's some options of really great crops that you can think about putting in your ground now. Beets, broccoli, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, onion, peas, potatoes, all really great right now. A single asterisk indicates that they can be seeded mid-March. Double asterisk means they can be seeded as early as late January, early February. So they're very, very cold tolerant. The rest of them, you want to think about starting indoors, January, February, which we're a little late on, or for transplant now in March if you're on top of it, or you can start direct seeding now, these things into your garden. In my garden, I've got onions going, I've got potatoes going, I've got peas going, I've got carrots going, and I'm not even sure I like beets or radishes yet, but I put them in. So I'm gonna figure out this year if I like them or not. And again, the weird formatting. So here we go. Summer and fall crops. These are your heat-loving things. They tend to be very hungry. As here in the Willamette Valley, we have like kind of a small growing period before things start shifting into fall again. Um, Here in the Willamette Valley, our last hard frost date is April 15th. So if you plant anything between now and April 15th that love the heat, you're gambling. It might get cold and it might take them out. And after that, and that means hard frost date, that means like the ground got really cold. Your plants are going to be very mad at you. Light frost date means the air just got a little bit cold, and the plants might be a little upset, but they might deal with it too at that point. So you're going to pay attention to those two dates because that's your like transplant slash direct seed dates that are indicated on those seed packets. Heat-loving crops, you for sure will want to wait to plant in the ground till after May 15th. You can be doing it inside, your seed starting, get that going. However, I do believe that if you were to plant some heat-loving crops in cold weather so that they got a few extra weeks of growth versus waiting and just did it in warm weather, you'd see that those warm weather crops are going to do a lot better, even though they're a couple weeks behind that seed starting, cold started one. Tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, squash, melons, corn are all examples of heavy feeders. So things that are very hungry and need routine fertilization in order to fully produce for you. Back in fall and winter crops, garlics, onions, shallots, leeks, beets. These are all things that can handle that cold weather, and some of them can even be overwintered into the spring for harvesting then. Um, Garlic's one of my favorite examples there. You can start garlic in the fall, get some good get some good growing weeks before the cold really sets in, and then they just kind of linger around for the whole winter and until about now when they start looking cool and like you want to fertilize them again. So overall, the question, when do I get started? There's no good answer. It just depends. Whenever, whenever you got the time. Because temperature is like the major limiting factor for us here in the Willamette Valley. We've got this gambling period here between now and April, May, that we don't really know what the weather looks like. We could get an extreme freeze event. It's happened before. Um, or it can just start summer early and be incredibly warm. I'm not entirely sure. But it also depends on whether you're deciding to direct seed versus start indoors. Um, but I'm going to give you a few tools, tips, and tricks for that timing and how you can get started a little bit earlier on some of these warmer season crops. So direct seeding is just fancy term for planting seeds directly into the soil of its final maturing place. That means it's going to germinate in the soil, and germination is just the fancy word for the first little bit of green coming out of that seed. For germination to happen, it requires adequate temperatures and moisture. They don't really need sunlight until they start emerging and getting that nice green color. So our spring temperatures is our major limiting factor for direct seeding. Most seeds, most asterisks, not all, require soil temperature above 55 degrees. Most things want it to be above 55 degrees to do growing at all. So again, last hard frost date, April 15th, last soft frost date, May 15th. Read your seed packages and they'll indicate what soil temperature those seeds like, what depth they want, the spacing recommended, how long you should wait before you can see them pop above the soil, which is good to know, and then how long before you can harvest. Some examples of direct seeding, you can do peas as early as January. February, you can start your lettuces and radishes. March, you can get into your potatoes, charge, and spinaches. Then we're moving on to cabbages, kales. I'm a little early on my carrots. That's fine. But we really want to wait until after that soft frost date to be direct seeding our melons and cucumbers and squashes. Otherwise, it's a gamble. If you have a question, I'm gonna look it up. Brand new to growing and growing in greenhouses. Is it true that you can grow almost anything year long? It is true to a degree in that is your greenhouse heated or not? Because our greenhouse here only keeps it warmer than the ambient air temperature by like 3 degrees at most. So we don't get a whole lot of impact on that heat. That heat really starts to accumulate when the sun comes out, and that greenhouse effect can take advantage. Greenhouse growing, but there's a lot of crops you can do in the winter in the greenhouse and out. And I've heard of people keeping their tomatoes alive in their greenhouses year round. It depends on that. There's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts to go over on that one. Oh, zoomed in on that. All right. On to the next. Indoor seeding. So indoor seeding, we're referring to starting seeds indoors with the intent to transplant them into soil later. Some plants do not like to do this. Some they'll tolerate it, but will thrive with direct seeding. This is usually due to sensitive roots that might just break off during that time. Seed packets will warn you about which ones do not want this and which ones do. Germination requires adequate temperatures and moisture. Again, sunlight post-emergence. It's the same indoors as it is outdoors. So when you're doing it indoor, rather than the cold being our major limiting factor, it becomes sunlight. And a lot of these things will get a little too leggy indoors, even when you have them against the window, which is nice to have some of those growing lights, get them started, keep them nice and compact. I like to recommend using a sterile soil for your seed germination, as this has a lack of nutrients in it and will not rot your seeds. You do not need to start fertilizing until they show signs of their true leaves. So when you're starting seeds indoors, you'll see their cute little baby leaves as the first ones they put off. Then the next set of leaves they put off is those true leaves, and those leaves are what are going to actually start to look like the plant. Before then, they all look the same. Um, so here I have a little schedule for starting your vegetables inside. I also have a handout that I can send you guys out with that too, if you're interested. And this is just a breakdown of things to start inside, to plant out in March, roughly, 6 to 4 weeks afterwards. All right, let's get, oh, my screen froze a little bit. There we go. Tips, tricks, and tools for early season starting. Greenhouses are really great at increasing humidity and temperature. So those greenhouses allow you to get an earlier start to your season. It'll warm up your soils a little quicker. Um, you can also use soil covers and dark fabrics to preheat your soil in grounds or in raised beds. So you might see farmers doing this around the Willamette Valley. I think a lot of strawberry farmers like to do the black plastic, and it's just called solar heating. And it's just to use those sun rays on the nice days we have to help increase the soil temperature, because it's really hard for the soil temperature to shift because there's so much earth. um, you can help it along with the solar heating. Amend your soils for desired texture when direct seeding. Vegetables like light, fluffy soil that is nutrient dense as well. But that fluffiness is the important part, because if they have to break through compacted clay, they're going to have troubles doing that. They don't want to have to fight the soil as they emerge. You can use things like reemay or cloches, which are these two pictures right there. The reemay is just a fabric harvest guard, and that will help prevent the light air frost from hurting the leaves of like your lettuces or something in this meantime while we're gambling. That garden cloche is really great for preventing that burning of the cold too. It also protects against hard rain and ice and freezes and whatnot. You can also use things like a empty gallon of milk that you cut up or something. It's like basically a tiny little greenhouse you're creating. Useful indoor seed starting supplies would be that seed starting soil. It's really nice and light and fluffy. Your starting trays. The inserts are just where you keep the soil. The tray can hold water, so it helps create that humidity and that moisture, as well as the dome will do that as well. The heating mat is really great if your house temperatures aren't very warm, or it's just keeping that root zone is the temperature that is needed for these guys. So it's the soil temperature that really matters during germination. Your air temperature can be a little bit colder in your house. As long as you've got one of those heating mats, you don't really have to worry about temperature, because as long as the root zone is being kept the right temperature, you're good to go. And then labels are incredibly useful that you don't think about having to need until it's too late. All of your seedlings look exactly the same until they don't. All right, care and maintenance, when we can actually start to see the fruits of our labors, or put in the labor for our fruits. basic plant maintenance I wanted to throw out there. Getting your plant into the ground is one thing. Keeping it alive is the real trick. Starting off with good soil and crop rotations will just set you off to a good start. As it's important to remember that when you've got the wrong pH happening into your beds, your plants can't uptake nutrients the same way. So they can be hungry, and you might be throwing fertilizer and fertilizer and fertilizer in there, and you're like, gosh, why do my plants still look hungry? It might be that your pH is a little off and they can't uptake those nutrients. In the garden, weeding will be your biggest chore. It's just the way that it is. It's okay. Watering and feeding will be your next focus. And then when you do all of that, ideally pests and disease will minimize and you won't have to think so much about them. Mulching and maintaining a mulch in the garden helps maintain water, food, and reduce weeds and pests. I got another. Did you have a question? Did I see a question in there? I got another one in here. How do you test pH, and is the pH recommendation on the seed packets? So things really want really basic, like dead in between pH. And we sell pH testing kits here on site, which are just look like tiny little pill bottles with little strips in them. You can also send in soil testing samples into places like OSU if you want a bigger in-depth analysis of your soil. All right, we're going to talk a little bit more about weeding because it is a consistent chore. It's a good indicator that your garden is doing well because healthy soil means happy plants. Weeds are going to want to grow there if your soil is being taken care of and you're watering. It's just the way it works. Weeds will want to grow. So you're just going to maintain and keep 6 inches of clearness away from your plants at least, so they don't have to compete with the weeds. You can minimize weeds by mulching at least 2 inches with like a, depends on what you got. I like to tell people mulching is a verb as well as a noun. So you're going to physically mulch with a organic rich mulch, like purely compost. It's confusing, but mulching keeps weeds away and provides water retention during our heat season. So it's like night and day around here. Once summer hits, it's going to be hot. As you're watering, I like to recommend keeping your watering at the root zones only. The picture that I have here is me watering a vegetable bed in a wrong manner, I would say. It was just for the picture, just for the Instagram. But if I were watering my raised beds, I would put that head of that hose in at the base of the plant and water it. The less water you just kind of get around, the less weeds are going to want to uptake. If there's no water happening there, weeds aren't going to want to seed at the surface of the soil.
So if you have drip lines, do you plant right next to where the water is coming out?
Yeah.
Like little
Yeah.
holes in your drip line?
Yeah.
Or farther away?
I would put it like right there. Depending on what it is, like strawberries aren't going to want that water right on the crown of the head. However, like lettuces don't have very extensive root systems.
Okay.
And you would want those ones like right up against that drip.
Yeah, that's kind of important to know because I have drip lines in my bed, so I would lay the drip line out first to see where the holes are and then put my seeds next to them.
Yeah, that's how I would do it.
Okay.
I love drip irrigation and I highly recommend it, in that it's automatic, it's efficient, and it's good for the bees.
The only downside is that, you set, I mean, I have an automatic thing, right? So I set it for a certain amount of gallons, a certain number of days a week, for example, or times a day. And times of day, but not every plant seems to want to have the same
Schedule.
schedule.
Yeah. that can be an issue. Um, I guess if they didn't want, some of them didn't water, you could modify the way your line goes and if and not plant right up against that drip hole. And then maybe like because as water penetrates the soil, it'll look like when you're doing a drip system, the water will look like a very tiny drop hole at the surface of the soil, but as it infiltrates the soil and wicks down further and further. So other plants that don't want as much moisture can kind of scavenge from the outside area potentially. Depends on what you're growing. You can use a weed barrier fabric as it reduces light availability below it, which reduces the amount of germination of seeds. And I also recommend to cover crop your resting soils. Like if you're going to take a year off of gardening, don't leave a bare area of soil because the weeds will move in. You can pick cover crop, and I'm only going over cover crops really lightly. If we want to talk more about cover crops, we can do that in the garden center or via email. But pick your cover crops with intent, and you can pick different cover crops to fix nitrogen into the soil. And what that means is that the plant is working to take nitrogen out of the air to create nodes on their roots in the soil. So when you till it in, it literally just puts fertilizer in. Things like legumes, peas and beans will do that. You can choose things to break up compaction. If you have really hard clay soils, you can choose things with really big, deep tap roots, and that will help break up that compaction. You can do things that will kind of fumigate the area, things like mustard, the mustard family, can fumigate in the soil, which reduces pests and diseases. Or you can just pick something general that you're going to intend to till in for the organic material. So you just want something with a lot of root growing biomass.
So for cover crop, can you basically you just till that in, you're assuming that it's dead once you've done that? Like for example, I have clover or a big chunk of land.
So cover cropping is tricky, which is kind of why I was just touching on it here.
Okay.
It takes very serious timing. So if you let your things go to flower, you don't want your things to go to flower. You gotta till it in before or mow it really tight before it flowers. Otherwise, you're just perpetuating a weed in the garden. And it depends on your goals and whatnot, whether you would want to till it in or do a nice tight mow and just get rid of that. And sometimes you might want to do multiple tills to ensure that the plant is dead. I think we do classes on cover cropping, and I have a handout on it, not right here, but in there. If anyone wanted to talk about it more, it's a pretty in-depth topic that requires a little bit more conversation, and this is just like a light little dusting upon you. We carry bulk seed for cover cropping. We have cover cropping classes uploaded on the YouTube page. So if you need help navigating that, just let us know and we are happy to help. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about watering and feeding. Feeding is very important for our vegetables here in the Willamette Valley, just because we have a small growing season before from when the weather changes to nice finally to changing back to poopy again. So those warm season crops that produce a lot of production for us, like your melons and your tomatoes, they really have just a small growing window for those very high yields. So I recommend planting with a balanced granular, and that's normally good enough for a lot of your vegetables in your garden. And by that I mean this tomato or this all-purpose there in the bottom right-hand corner. These granular fertilizers have a long-lasting impact in the soil, and that it takes about 3 months of work. They work for like 3 months before they're out and done.
They just go on the top, or do you like kind of mix them in?
So you got to be careful for what kind of fertilizer you're using. I like to use the GB organic fertilizers that I have here, and it's harder to burn your plants with those GB organic ones. So you don't have to be as scientific or accurate as you do with some of them, like say Miracle Grow, which might be a little tougher, harder on your plants. Um, so when I'm planting, I'll put a little small fistful in the hole at planting or right below, or I'll do like a fine layer between the seed and the fertilizer. If I'm doing transplants, I'll for sure put a fistful in there. On my seeds, I might wait a bit because they're not actively needing that fertilization until they're actually growing.
So a fistful in below the transplant.
Yeah.
In the soil.
Yeah.
Not sprinkled on. Not mixed with the soil that you're putting.
You can do that too. For this very initial planting, I would put it in the hole of the plant. In 3 months, when you're putting another granular down, you can scratch it into the surface of the soil and it'll water in. Very hungry feeders, or I'm getting ahead of myself here a second. The granular stuff is really nice because it's long lasting, slow release stuff. However, your plant has to be nice and warm for your plant to be able to access those because it's slow going. So when we're in colder temperatures, it's a good idea to be using a liquid fertilizer because it's a little quicker, more quickly and readily uptakeable by the plant. So these early season crops, it's a good idea to use the liquid for like right now is a really great idea to use liquid for like if you had garlic or onions, liquid would be a good option for that. Liquid is also a really great option as a liquid is a great option for your heavy feeders later on in the season too, because your melons just need so much food. So I like to recommend using both for your heavy feeders. Watering is more prevalent in pots and raised beds. Different crops have different watering needs. It's not a one size fits all type of thing. As you're watering, I like to recommend to keep water off of the foliage. Water can not only attract disease like powdery mildew, water can act as kind of like a magnifying glass on ants. We burn ants when in the sun, you know. Water can create little magnifying glasses on the edge of your plants, and just the sun can burn them a little bit extra when you're watering the foliage. So localize that water at the roots will help with disease as well as weeds. Drip irrigation, efficient, automatic, good for the bees. I'm going to touch very lightly on pests and diseases here. These are some often ones you might see in the garden as you're doing your vegetable garden. Insects you're likely and very often going to see: aphids, slugs, and beetles. You may even see caterpillars and whatnot. I like to recommend people to not fret or freak out too soon because there's a lot of bugs that are more helpful than they are hurtful. So just beware of what you're treating for when you go to treat it. Aphids are a very common one that nobody likes in the garden. And you can use things like Captain Jack's, which is organic, for those. Sluggos, really great for the slugs. People also like to use like hazelnut shells or egg shells as it's really rough and can tear up their little bodies. Animals are going to be your next biggest pests. The birds, the rodents, the squirrels.
Ducks.
Ducks. For animals, I recommend using a physical barrier or deterrents, things like nets, sprinklers, and bird tape. There's some of those automatic sprinklers that just sense motion and will go off as soon as it senses motion. You can also use chemical deterrents like bone meal is good as a fertilizer. They also use it in a lot of those deterrents because it smells like death and things don't want to come around when it smells like their dying friends. Um,
It's really stinky to work in.
yeah.
I mean, like,
There's pros and
less
cons.
pleasant.
Yes. Um, so I like to recommend using a couple different things when you're using like these chemical deterrents. Some of them are made to make your whole area generally unpleasant, like the bone meal makes it smelly. They don't generally want to be there. And then you can use things that have like capsaicin in them, which is the spicy element to peppers. And so when the deer or the rodents do make it past that bone meal and they're like, oh, it's kind of smelly in here. And they do finally make it to your plant and they taste that plant and they learn that it's spicy. They'll register in their brain that that plant is spicy and they're less likely to come back and visit it and frequent it if they've labeled it in their brain that it's a spicy plant. You can also make your own things out of like clove and garlic for the same reasons. Stinky, it's spicy. You can, and you could see diseases in the garden as well. Oftentimes here in the Willamette Valley, we'll see fungal issues like powdery mildew. When you're dealing with these, you're just going to remove the sick parts. Powdery mildew in particular is kind of a difficult one in that its lifespan is only like 3 days. So to keep on top of it, you kind of have to visit it at least every 3 days or it's just going to be reproducing on your plant. You're going to remove those sick parts, get them out of there, and you can use a fungicide to use on it as well. I've heard of people using water like to get rid of the powdery mildew in that the chlorine in the tap water can clean it off, but you'd have to do that pretty routinely. Or I've heard people using milk for powdery mildew. Um, I'm not sure about either of those things personally, so I'll just be removing the sick parts and trying to keep up on those. If I really need, I'll use a fungicide, but for the most part, prevention is always an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So, and that applies to viral diseases as well. The most prevalent viral disease you're likely to visit or see in the garden is the tomato viral disease that causes the curly leaf disease, and that is from a overwatering in the soil. Tomatoes in raised beds and in the ground don't need a whole lot of water. If they're in a container, they need a lot more because they can't spread those root systems. However, if you overwater tomatoes, you can cause that curly leaf issue. And then at that point, it's in your soil. And there's nothing you can do about it. And you're going to have to do a crop rotation for a few years so you don't get your next year's viral disease in there too. Next year's tomato. Anyway, ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. And as you're going to treat and work on your plants that are sick, we're always happy to help you identify issues in the garden here at Chenard's Nursery. The number one thing you need to do as you're fighting these things is figure out what's actually happening. Figure out what insect is causing you an issue. Prevention is key. And always, 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 always read the chemical instructions. Be mindful of your pollinators. When you're spraying chemicals in the garden, you're affecting other live organisms out there. So this is a little chart that I made to help people kind of navigate what kind of issues they might be seeing on their plants. We've got pests, environmental issues, and things like overwatering, chemical burns, not enough sunlight. And then on the other end, we have diseases, symptoms you might see with the diseases, and how they all kind of overlap in between each other. How if you're seeing browning tips, that could be an indicator of pests or an environmental issue like too much sun. If your soil is stinky, as I mentioned earlier, you do not want stinky soil. That could be an indicator of a disease in your soil or an environmental issue of overwatering. Deformed new growth is a very important one to look at. That one's a very good indicator. That one can either mean that you're seeing pests or diseases in the garden. And as you see in the center, any number of these things you could see defoliating, wilting, sad yellow leaves, stunted growth, or death of your plant. So there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts with this. It can be hard to identify what's happening with your plant, and we are happy to help. Pictures are great. Pictures worth 1,000 words. Email me a picture, bring it in. We've got some pretty knowledgeable people on staff. And that being said, I wanted to touch a little bit on our pollinators and how you should always keep your local pollinators in mind when you're doing anything in the garden, especially chemical applications. Like it or not, you're creating your own little ecosystem in your backyard that invites bugs into your area. More bugs that we interact and encounter with are more helpful than they are hurtful. Some of them might even, the caterpillars, might even be the first phase of one of your favorite butterflies, you know? Or I don't know if you've ever seen the nymph like stage of a ladybug. It looks terrifying, but it's a ladybug. That's who you want in your garden working for you. So another thing about pollination, it's required on some of your vegetable crops, not all of them. Especially important pollination would be on things like your tomatillos, squashes, melons, and tomatoes. Tomatillo is a little different in the other ones in that it needs 2 different varieties of tomatillo to pollinate itself, kind of like fruit trees. And I want to leave you here with some easy peasy pollinator practices for the garden because I am a big advocate for pollinators. Some simple, easy things you can do in the garden is just do the bare minimum, which is exciting. Leave out your leaves, your branches, and your trimmings. Don't trim your perennial stems. Don't mow and weed. Don't weed where you can, and don't chemically treat where you can. They like it. We have a lot of native bees in Oregon. A lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. It's a lot more than just the honeybee out here. And a lot of them will nest in bare soils, which is why it's an okay thing to leave bare soils in your yard. A lot of them will also nest in piles of leaves and branches. So if you don't get around to cleaning up that pile of branches in your backyard, don't feel bad. You're doing that for the pollinators. Another really great thing is that the pollinators just go where the plants are. You plant some plants, they're going to come find you. Native bees do prefer native plants, but when you're thinking about your pollinators and you're planting for your pollinators, just think about diversity. You never know what they're going to actually love, and they just want to be able to frequent a lot of different things. So always keep your chemical applications in mind and your pollinators. You have a greater impact in your garden than you realize. So just be sure that you're making a positive one to your area around you. And as you're going through working in your garden, it's always keep these thoughts in your brain too of your next planning steps. Maturity dates, what space are you going to have open in the next 60-ish days? What crops are you going to be looking forward to in the next season? How are you going to navigate that crop rotation? Did you have any issues that you were fighting, watering, weeding, deer, and how can you take steps to address it for next time? What worked? What did you like? Keep doing what you like and what worked. And yeah, that's really what it's all about, is just doing what we like and what we want. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you all learned something a little. Yeah.
I was at I think it was the organic gardening class, and she was mentioning we could fertilize our camellias then. and I mentioned I had tea camellias, and she said that's different. And she was gonna get back to me, but I haven't heard. But what is the danger of fertilizing too early? Is it, or is it just wasteful, or can I burn them, or what's the danger?
So there's some things that have specific fertilization needs, like June bearing strawberries is a good example of a specific one, in that if you fertilize too early, you're promoting leaf growth versus berry growth, and you want berry growth on your strawberries. So unless there's a specific thing like that with tea camellias, but as far as I understand, tea camellias, you're looking for the leaves, right? For that green growth. It should be fine. I don't see there being an issue.
They're
with that.
later to wake up than the normal camellias.
Yeah.
But
If you did a liquid now and they're not actively growing, it might be wasted fertilizer in that it will just wash out between now and when it's actively growing. If you do like a granular now, that will last in the soil for like the next 3 months, and that probably would be a good option for you. Camille, who did that class, is here on staff today, so if you wanted to chase her down, you totally can.
sometimes I like cleaning up, but then I'll have this like partial bag of fertilizer, and I think, well, it's the middle of winter, but what if I just spread it out? It'll all just be there ready for spring, right?
It might wash out, especially here in the Willamette Valley, here in the middle of the dead winter. There's more rain than there is actively growing plants, so that's the only hesitation I have on that. And that's particularly important if you live like near a river or something. Like you don't want to be washing nutrients that's not being used, just like
I live on the bank.
into the river. Yes, yeah. So you when we live in places like that, just taking a little bit of extra intentional thought into your fertilizing can help minimize like nutrient runoff into the river, which causes like algal blooms and stuff like that.
My husband and I are always in a disagreement on watering times. Is it better to water in the morning or in the evening for the plants to absorb? Or I guess the day.
That's a good question. So I guess it depends on how you're watering. Like I said, watering on the foliage burns plants. So if you've got a sprinkler, you're just putting it out there and calling it good. Do not do that in the evening time, because that will burn all of your plants with that harsh evening sun. If you're to throw a sprinkler out in the morning time, it would give those plants more time to dry out during the day, the foliage. I
But if you're doing the hand watering,
If you're doing hand watering, it's mostly about what's best for your schedule, I would think, and what's more convenient.
but watering at night doesn't necessarily create more mildew.
Not if you're hand watering at the base of your plant. If you're watering the foliage, it would create more mildew. Any other questions?
What should your soil pH be?
That is a great question. And I believe it's like 6.5.
Unless you have acid plants
Exactly.
like blueberries. I mean,
Yeah.
As far as using a shade, net
Yeah.
in the summer when it's super hot.
Yeah.
How do you know, like, whether to use that?
Yeah, so that's a
Like
good
what?
question. Indications that you might want to put up some shade fabric is if you've got that harsh evening sun. If you start to see the burning tips, like browning, crispy tips. And then also I found a lot of my plants just looked sad. And like they needed water, but they were fully saturated. And that is an indication that they're too hot. And that would be a good indication to put up some fabric.
Yeah, I made a mistake of putting up fabric. I think it was not last summer, but the summer before. So it was like late afternoon, just that super heat. We had those heat waves. And the tomatoes and the squashes like didn't like it.
Yeah. They'd
And
probably have a hard
so-
time ripening up.
Yeah, so it's like, I learned my lesson about like paying more attention about what to put in each bed.
Yeah, so you're gonna think about your heat loving crops, which will be your melons, your tomatoes. Those things are good to let just bake in the sun. Things what more well suited for a shadier area would be like your chards, your herbs, your lettuces, maybe even like broccoli and cabbage.
Then one final question about lettuce. So is there, if you put it in a bed and the leaves are thicker, is that just due to the type of lettuce you planted, or like it got too much sun, so then it got leathery?
Probably due to the type. I'm not sure what you've planted, but my thoughts are like basil. Like there's a bunch of different kinds of basil, and there's the mammoth basil. And if you accidentally buy a mammoth basil, it's got these mottled curly leaves, and it's much more thick, and it looks sad compared to regular basil, but it's just supposed to be like that.
Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question about the curly leaves and the tomatoes.
Yeah.
Cause I definitely have had that happen. So is that a viral issue? Can you treat that?
It is a viral issue, and I do believe at that point your tomato's basically done. You can try to write it out and see if it's going to
So like,
produce, but
pushing the leaves off isn't gonna change it.
no, it's in the soil.
And that happens because of overwatering?
Yep.
Okay.
And if you buy it a start and then it's like you've got it in the ground and it does that, can you assume that it was already infected?
I would think if you're gonna, you should see it on a start. It's pretty obvious. I wonder if I can look up a picture here, because they're more.
Never started out that way, but I've had a couple of years where they like kind of turn that way, more towards like 3/4 of the way through the season.
Yeah,
So then that's
Yep.
brought on by overwatering.
yeah, that's about when we start seeing those samples coming in. And it's more than just like a light curl. It's like totally modeled.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. If anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to answer or try to.
I have really enjoyed this and I really enjoyed your passion about it.
Oh, thank
Your
you.
energy was wonderful.
There's a companion planting vegetable.
Oh, I want
too.
that too, please.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. I think I have a question on here, but I'm having troubles finding it.
It's about whether there's a booklet. Someone wanted to have a step-by-step.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There is a really cool booklet here for sale at Chenard's made by I forget who did it, somewhere local. It's specific here to the Willamette Valley, and it goes month by month, January, February, March, April, the things that you should be doing in the garden, what you should be planting, what you should be transplanting, what you should be pruning, what you should be fertilizing. And I highly recommend that little calendar to people because it's like a very easy place to start.
So can you get that online?
Um,
Like, could we get it through an email?
it's a purchased thing. It's like $15.
Okay.
And I don't know if you email me, I can see if there's a place online that you can purchase that and have it sent to you.
Oh, well, that's not a problem. I just thought, less paper,
Oh,
just easier to store. I mean,
yeah.
I don't mind purchasing it all. But is it a calendar that starts at the beginning of the year then?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So then generally, would you say that calendar is going to be good for the next year? It's just okay.
Yeah, they're not dated with a year. It's just month by month.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, thank you for answering that.
You're
It
welcome.
sounds like a great tool.
Yeah, it is. I really love it. And it's especially
Uh,
great for people who are new to our area and don't quite understand the growing seasons of the Willamette Valley, because it is like
yeah.
specific to the Willamette Valley.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Oh, and I missed a question in here about it being able to share the class. Yes, I do. It's going to be on YouTube, and I can also try to send you slides if you guys would wish. But it'll be on YouTube as well.
Okay, great. All
So
right. Well, take care.
you're welcome. Have a good one.
Uh-huh.
GMJC8, can you just email me, Angelee@chenards.com, and that way I can send them to you or share